Hello, and welcome to Casual Krakoa. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. It's a site where you can find great reading orders through the entire X-Men Reign of X, the Hickman era of X-Men, and beyond through all Marvel events. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining here live on Casual Krakoa here August 4th, 2021. We got two comics that came out in the world of X today. We got X-Men number 2 and Hellions number 14, both of which I think give us a fair amount to talk about. So for those of you who are live, definitely let me know in the chat any questions that you may have about the comics or just about X-Men comics in general today, or just, Bulls free agency, right? Things are looking good for the Bulls. We can talk whatever. Get your questions in. Also, let me know if there are any issues with volume, with picture, with literally anything other than my hat or my shirt, because those are both good right now. I got the Comic Book Herald hat, and I got the Doctor Who, Dr. Fate crossover tee going. So I'm confident in those. Don't need any commentary there. But otherwise, we're going to talk X-Men number 2 and Hellions number 14. Again, thanks so much for joining. Let's start with X-Men number 2, writer Jerry Duggan, art by Pepe Larraz and Marty Gracia, letters here by Clayton Cowles. We're going to get to the question that I have put in the video title here today, I think first and foremost. And then after we've talked about X-Men, I definitely want to get into Hellions and really dig into some talk of one of the bigger drops from Mister Sinister today. And I'll put it that way before I say, if you are listening here live or not even, if you've come later, there will be some spoilers for today's comics, right? For X-Men number 2 and for Hellions number 14, both comics that came out today. I want to talk about in a fair amount of detail. So if you have not read them, there may be details revealed. Okay, so there's your warning. Let's get out of there now. But otherwise, let's get in on X-Men number 2. Okay, this issue opened with a bit of a curveball because we had a Nova quote up front talking about the Annihilation War. It's actually kind of a bit of a curveball opener. So you get the Nova quote about the Annihilation War. Then there's a page of Gambit hosting a card game with Ben Grimm, Rhino, and Black Cat. Okay, it was a very Marvel Universe-centric kind of opening. And this comic is not necessarily that. In many ways, it still very much feels like an X-Men comic. But I wonder if that was an attempt by Jerry Duggan to sort of say how much X-Men is going to be playing with the Marvel Universe at large. And it kind of got me thinking about, so this is the return of X-Men as a super team comic, okay? The Jonathan Hickman run post House and Powers, when he was the writer on X-Men, right? As the head of X, obviously there's a lot of influence there, but when he was the actual writer on the title X-Men for the first 21 issues, that book was not a super team comic, right? There was literally no X-Men team, as we've talked about a number of times, until the election at this summer's Hellfire Gala. So now X-Men relaunches with Jerry Duggan writing, with Pepe Larraz and Marty Gracia as an art team, and now it's a super team comic, okay? Now we're really reinstilling what it means for the X-Men to be a super team for the Marvel Universe at large. And that puts them in sort of competition, in a way, with the other super teams of the Marvel Universe, right? And namely, throughout history, that has been like the Fantastic Four and the Avengers, okay? And the question I asked here, it's kind of twofold. One, is the return of the X-Men as a super team comic a good thing? But then two, it's also for me, like, are they the best super team? Is this X-Men comic the best super team comic at Marvel? And honestly, I would extend that even potentially to DC. Now, I want to be very clear here that through 2 issues, X-Men by Duggan, Larraz, and Gracia is not my favorite comic, okay? The difference between being the best super team comic and between being, the best Marvel comic, those are 2 very different things. I'm talking specifically and exclusively about a comic that is a team book. That is a difficult challenge in and of itself, right? Your Justice Leagues and your Avengers are, of course, the 2 biggest team names sort of in the big 2 comics right now. But those are extremely difficult franchises to pull off. Only a handful of writers have really done it very, very well throughout, the last, let's say 20 plus years, okay? So for an X-Men comic to really center in as a super team, that's not even necessarily what the book has been historically. A lot of times X-Men acts, as Hickman's work did, as sort of a, what is the status quo for mutant kind? Like that is an angle that X-Men as a title can often take. And in here, but if you look back at, like, let's say the 90s, the Jim Lee era kicking off in 1991, you have your very specifically gold team, blue team, you have super teams aligned. They are going out on big superhero missions, and that is sort of the framing, and then all of the tropes that go along with that sort of storytelling follow. So Duggan, Laraz Gracia, they're playing very much in that field. So let's talk about the first question first, which is the return of X-Men as a super team comic a good thing? Now, I talked about this when I talked about the launch of X-Men #1, how the change from Hickman's viewpoints and take on X-Men as being the vehicle for looking at Krakoan life and looking for status quo across mutant kind, the change from that, and, very importantly too, like being able to follow up deliberately and specifically on ideas that Hickman seeded in House of X and Powers of 10. The change from that to big superhero comic, big super team comic book, that feels regressive. I mean, that is definitely a change from new and exciting to very familiar and done before, okay? And that is the challenge here that I think Duggan and the creative team face, because the idea of an X-Men team that goes on random missions to stop big explosions or alien invasions, been there, done that, right? That is a thing that we are very familiar with. And I'm wondering in some ways, is this X-Men run, as it's rebooted, is it handicapped a little bit? Is it handicapped in the sense of being the flagship title, but not being able to answer or really carry out any of the flagship ideas that were set up in House and Powers, right? Because those are Hickman things. And X-Men #2 kind of, it has an interesting approach to that. I was very nonplussed with this comic. Laraz and Gracia are amazing. They're so good. And this book looks incredible. But I think on an idea level, through the first 2 issues of X-Men, there's a part of me, my initial read, where I'm looking at this thinking, on an idea level, what are we doing, right? What are we delivering here that is unique? What is special about this? And I think I've thought about it some more since then and cooled a little bit, and I think it's better than I'm giving it credit for. Again, I think one of the biggest challenges this book will face, inevitably, after 5 issues, when Laraz and Gracia need a break, okay, and a fill-in artist takes their place, will X-Men still seem good? Okay, because right now, artistically, it is being carried to another level. Laraz and Gracia on a title makes it feel important, and it makes it feel like an event that few artists in superhero comics can pull off right now, okay? They're working at another level, and credit where it's due, absolutely. Jerry Duggan knows this. He knows this. He recognizes this. He gives them space to work. He's very intelligent, I would say, about scripting a book that tells us he knows these artists are on top of their game. He knows when to give them wiggle room and to lean into, okay, it's an X-Men versus an Annihilation wave battle. Have at it, okay? Have at it. But there's still definitely that part of me that is like, I don't know how into a return of a super team X-Men book I am, specifically set in the Krakoa era, because I'm not that sure what it tells us about Krakoa. But after I thought about it some more this issue, there's actually a fair amount that X-Men is doing, this rebooted series, that ties into very specifically into the Krakoa era, okay? You have Duggan and the team here working with the biggest question that I find is the most interesting, which is what happens when the world finds out about Krakoan resurrection? That's a really interesting question. It is something that has not been delivered upon, and it is something that through 2 issues is clearly a theme. In issue #1, we had Ben Urich, longtime reporter for the Daily Bugle and elsewhere throughout New York City in the Marvel Universe, basically digging into, investigating, and saying, hey, Jumbo Carnation died very famously. He is now apparently back designing all this mutant fashion for the Hellfire Gala. How did that happen, right? There's something going on here where mutants who were dead are back. And we also have Orchis looking into the same thing, which makes a ton of sense, as we learn here from Dr. Stasis, a new Orchis player that we learned about in this issue, where Dr. Stasis says, hey, we recovered, Scott Summers' body when the X-Men infiltrated our Orchis facility back in House of X #4. And he's, he's doing the autopsy on this mutant body. And they also, they see Scott Summers very publicly out in the world. They know he's back. They know he died, and they know he's back, right? So mutant kind is not especially secretive about the fact that they have solved the death problem, as Dr. Stasis kind of puts it. The question that everyone still has is like, the specifics, right? How did they do it? What exactly does that mean for us? And I think that question is definitely holding my interest, because that is an interesting question to consider. Again, it was something I teased out in the Hellfire Gala. That was one of my theories, was like, what if the world finds out at the gala, non-mutant individuals in the Marvel Universe find out that mutants have solved for death? What is that going to mean? What would that upset? And I think one of the big things, that Orcus and Dr. Stasis here tease out is like, humanity already thinks there's some sort of Krakoan cult going on, right? Like many X-Men readers. When they find out that they have solved death through this potentially creepy looking resurrection thing, that's a thing that could actually turn anti-mutant sentiment. You also then have mutants withholding that capability from humankind, right? And saying, we have established eternal life, but we're not going to grant it to you. Again, it's just another item where mutants are sort of lording their superiority over humankind. That's a really interesting conversation. I'm curious to see that continue to play out. I think, too, this book is also, and credit here to Duggan as well, it's also doing interesting work rolling out surprising and unfamiliar X-Men villains. Okay, it is rolling out new and interesting threats through the first two issues. We have quite a few. The most familiar threat that the X-Men have faced right now. Annihilation Wave excluded, which is kind of a strange thing that we'll get to here in a second. But the most familiar threat that they have faced in these X-Men comics so far is Cordyceps Jones. Cordyceps Jones has shown up in one issue previously, Rocket number 4. Fun fact, he's a spore, essentially, a sentient spore. He was snorted by Deadpool into his brain, into his body, and then Deadpool and Rocket Raccoon stole all his money, and then Deadpool puked him out into a gutter on the street in space. Okay, and now Cordyceps Jones has returned as sort of a leader, as sort of a very visually distinctive too by Laura Grassi, great design there, as sort of a leader of this gambling ring that is apparently betting on who can take out the Earth, whether their different plans will work. In the first issue, we saw basically this giant ultra mega kind of robot thing, and then in this issue we see them unleashing an annihilation wave. A little fuzzy on the details here. How one maintains an annihilation wave in a bottle. I mean, if you're not super familiar with Marvel Comics, of the past 15 years, Annihilation is a 2006-2007 era Marvel cosmic event. It is often heralded as the kickoff of like the best, excuse me, modern Marvel cosmic comics, and it's awesome. But in that event, Annihilus of the Negative Zone, longtime Fantastic Four villain, he leads like all of the forces of the Negative Zone in his annihilation wave, and it's sort of just this endless, attack of bugs and aliens and monsters and all that, and it wipes out all sorts of, civilizations across the galaxy. It creates an incredible devastation, and here we see these aliens unleash an annihilation wave, but it's taken down by 7 X-Men. So I don't know. It's comics. I'll allow it to happen, right? It's fine. But I think those are the good things. Those are the good things going on with X-Men right now. As a Superteam comic, though, it's like there's some really nice moments too. Like there's a nice moment of Jean Grey teaching Synch how to use telepathic powers, how to use psychic powers. That's cool. Like that's a cool situation. I like seeing more development for Synch. I like the follow up here on Synch and Laura Kinney having this incredibly strained and just like almost impossible to imagine relationship where they spent hundreds of years falling in love together in the vault, but only Synch remembers that. There's some really interesting stuff going on with these characters, but it's like it's just a big Superteam comic, and I guess you kind of have to be in the mood for that, and kind of the throwback that it feels like in some ways, while also acknowledging where it's pushing forward in order to enjoy it. Like I said, like I'm definitely cooler on this than many. I'm glad lots of fans seem to be enjoying it. Again, with Laura Grassi on art, like it's always going to be a book worth picking up. I'm pushing for this, and I'm hoping that this work will really have something to say. We'll have ideas. We'll have new concepts and things to introduce to the Krakoa era, rather than kind of just playing down the middle and playing like keep away before Hickman gets back with Inferno. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want this X-Men run to just feel like, hey, we'll just do some fun super team stories in between the real meat, which is like kind of what it has to be. And I know that's a almost unfair thing to say, but if you look at the other title that I'm interested in talking about today, in Hellions, Hellions has been one of my favorite X-Men books since it launched. It still is, right? And it's up to 14 issues. I mean, right now for me, it's Hellions, it's Sword, and it's still kind of Way of X, although I need to see how it finishes before I totally commit. Those are my top three with Hickman out of the picture right now. I really like New Mutants, what's been going on there as well, but it's not at that level for me. Okay, and Hellions is a book that has absolutely established a unique identity. It has established a unique position in the Krakoan atmosphere, and as we'll talk about when we talk about the issue, it is following up on Seeds in kind of its own unique way with Mister Sinister, right? What will that be for this X-Men run? Will it be the world finding out about mutant resurrection? Will it be development for Orcus, a threat that we really don't know much about? Like, we just really don't know enough about Orcus at this point, I would say, for them to continue to be sort of this almost number one nemesis. I mean, the thing that makes Orcus interesting is everything we learned in House and Powers, and it's the return of Nimrod, right? It's a familiar entity that they are responsible for. But other than that, like, what makes Orcus unique individually? That's something that I definitely want to see. So I'd like, in some ways, I appreciated and I preferred the sort of post-superhero X-Men as a title, right? Like, this is regression just with incredible visuals. But in some ways, I recognize, and the reason I asked the question is that like just a completely absurd standard to be holding this comic to? And, if we take it on its face as a super team comic, is it the best super team comic in comics right now? Like, the way I think artistically, the answer for me is almost certainly yes. There's one Marvel title that maybe two that I would say are better super team comics right now. But if you look at like X-Men like versus Avengers, right? X-Men versus Fantastic Four. This X-Men run already through 2 issues, I like it way more than Avengers by Jason Aaron. I like it way more than Fantastic Four by Dan Slott. Okay, definitely a better super team comic than both of those through 2 issues. I have no doubt that it will continue to be so. I would say Guardians of the Galaxy, because Al Ewing's writing it, probably a better super team comic. It has potential to usurp that. And I would also say, ironically, Eternals, which don't super feel like a super team, but, in some ways they are. The Kieran Gillen and Esau Ribic run, like, that's definitely better for me than X-Men right now. So it's not the best super team comic in Marvel right now, but it has that potential. It has that capacity. And again, like, writing true super teams, which I do get royalties every time I say the word super team in this episode. So that is why I'm repeating that 8 billion times. But like, that's a challenge. That is hard to do, to build enough character moments, to build specific interactions between these individuals, to give them threats that aren't event-sized yet feel event-sized. That is a hard thing to do in comics right now. I would say probably I don't know that it's not easy, but like, it's easier to write, let's say, like a good Daredevil or Moon Knight, a good distinct take on a solo character than it is to write a really good team book. I definitely believe that. I just think there's so many more moving pieces and there's so many more challenges to make those things distinct. I just think it's a tremendous challenge. Look at like the Scott Snyder, Jorge Jimenez Justice League over on the DC side, right? That had so much potential coming out of the Snyder, out of Batman and Metal and all that. And it just, it never clicked for me. It was never great. That's a tough thing to do, even for very good creators. So I'm hopeful that X-Men can really elevate. Again, like, there are interesting teases in this work of threats to come, of these individuals that we did not know about before, that I want to see happen. I think too, it's interesting, like, if you look historically at like what have been the best super team books in Marvel, it's not as X-Men heavy as you might think. So like, if I just look back throughout the 2000s in particular, like in 2001, New X-Men, in 2002, potentially New X-Men again. You got X-Statix in there as well. 2003, you get Fantastic Four and X-Statix. 2004, Astonishing X-Men. 2005, New Avengers. 2006, Next Wave. 2007, debate between New Avengers Illuminati and the Mike Carey era of X-Men kicking off. 2008, you get Guardians of the Galaxy kicking in. And Guardians of the Galaxy, the Abnett Landing run, that potentially carries the crown for me from like 2008 to 2010, the competition being Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four kicking off around that, right? 2011, you get Kieran Gillen X-Men versus Hickman Fantastic Four. From 2012 to 2015, it's for sure the Hickman Avengers, New Avengers combo, right? That's the best super team book in Marvel. Then you get a weird gap where you have 2016, 2017. I would actually say Al Ewing's Ultimates and Ultimates 2 is the best Marvel team book. 2018, competition here between Marvel 2-in-1 and X-Men Red. And then you get to 2019, and now you get the Hickman X-Men era kicking off. And then, from there, you have internal competition, I would say right now, where is X-Men the best super team book within the X line, right? I think that's a challenge as well, because I would say within the X line, again, Sword and Hellions are better, okay? And whether or not you consider those traditional super teams, certainly not, but in their way, they are. So I'm curious. I'm curious if this run can continue to deliver, if it can pay off. Again, there's stuff that I like. I like Jean Grey and Polaris combining powers, right, in this issue. We see all these examples of mutant telepathy, and we see, I don't know if this makes any sense, right? Like Jean Grey's like, your magnetism and my telepathy are combining to make an MRI machine for memories. I don't care if that's how MRI machines work. Sure, it works for me. I'll take it. That's fine. And it is interesting, too. You have this X-Men team. So, again, it's like we have these 7 X-Men. They are on a mission to protect everyone in a way that is not necessarily advantageous to Krakoa, but is advantageous to, like, mutant public relations, okay? And for Scott and Jean, it's not necessarily about that. It's just like, we just protect everyone. That's just what we do. We're heroes. But they're absolutely fulfilling a PR role, right? Like, mutant relations need a boost, and they're doing that. It's interesting, like, it's in post-Fall of the Mutants X Factor, the original 5 mutants in the Fall of the Mutants being like late 80s, you have Louis Simonson and Walt Simonson on the run at that time. After Fall of the Mutants, the original 5 X-Men stop Apocalypse from destroying a bunch of New York, or they slow him. He still destroys a lot of it. And then the team literally parades through the streets. They're like in cars, like waving to the people as they cheer. Mutant kind needs more moments like that. Mutant kind needs more moments where they get invited to barbecues in Kansas and have a good time. That is good for the world's understandings of mutants. And I think one of the downsides of the Krakoa era is I'm a firm believer in mutants carving out this space on Krakoa that is theirs, that is their unique culture and their unique society, that makes a lot of sense. But one of the downsides of that is if you're separate from everyone else, from humankind, they don't get to know you. Okay, and they don't get to know what you're about, and this X-Men team becomes an opportunity and a version to really change people's hearts and minds, right? Like, and that's not necessarily the goal. They're just doing it because that's what they do. But that's definitely going to be, I think, an important thing where this battle of public perception continues to be relevant. I mean, it's like Orcus when they're talking about how they defeat Krakoa and how they defeat mutant kind. They're talking about public perception. That's a thing that Professor X and Magneto, and maybe not Magneto actually, because it kind of does some stuff with Marauders, but like Professor X and Moira, I don't know that they're thinking about that at all. It seems like they don't really care. And I think when you're thinking about the long term and you're thinking into the distant future and you're considering advancing to a collective phalanx intelligence, you don't care. What does it matter what people think? But in the moment, in the right now, it potentially matters that Krakoa is not hated. That's a thing that potentially matters. So, I'm curious what you all think. Definitely let me know here in the comments if I'm being too hard on X-Men, if it's really, really great, if you're loving it. Right now, in short, I would say artistically, it's excellent. Narratively, wait and see. I definitely want to see how a full arc comes together, because on some level, too, like, Aliens just gambling and like goofing off and sending threats to Earth for the X-Men to stop is an enjoyable enough like villain of the month kind of comics concept, but it's also just mojo. like it's just mojo, okay? It's just an alien entity whose ways we don't really understand, looking for entertainment. That's all Cordyceps Jones in this gambling ring outside a black hole or whatever. That's all they are, right? They're just like looking for entertainment through violent destroying Earth means. And I've read Mojo stories before. they're rarely my favorite, right? Like I've seen the Mojo episodes of X-Men the animated series, not my favorites, okay? And that's kind of all that's happening here. So I like the additional threads that are going on here with the individual who is trying to the human who's trying to evolve himself with the end of this with Dr. Stasis and whatever's going on there. I mean, Dr. Stasis, that whole thing was really interesting. This Orcus member, he's having food, he's having a meal with his family. The wife or woman character gets something wrong, and then the wife and the son drop dead. There's some animal that comes in, kind of like an animal hybrid sidekick thing. Potential high evolutionary connection there, because obviously High Evolutionary loves his getting his Dr. Moreau on. So I'm curious to see where all this might go. Definitely going to be giving it time. Definitely going to be giving it reads. It's nothing like some of my least favorite X books, which I will not even name. We'll go full positive here as we transition to Hellions. But yeah, let me know what people think. The super chat is open and is available if you want to get questions in and prioritize. But otherwise, we got some good stuff to talk about here as we go forward and talk Hellions number 14, as well as some questions that I've been seeing from individuals. So all right, keep getting those questions in. Definitely love to be answering all the good ones that I see. All right. I got a good question here about chimeras. We'll get to it again as we get into Hellions number 14. Let's talk Hellions, because there's a lot to talk about here, and let's get to it. Because okay, like I said, Hellions rules. Love this book. It's awesome. We have writer Zeb Wells, artist Roge Antonio, colors Rain Barreto, letters by Ariana Maher. I talked about this last week with Cable, how it was such a nice thing for Duggan and Noto to be tackling that entire run as a consistent creative unit. Hellions is feeling that. A lot of artistic turnover, right? A lot of change. Change isn't always bad. We can accept it sometimes, but it is a little disorienting, and I'm not as into the art here. Honestly, I think Zeb Wells is a fantastic storyteller, but definitely this issue suffered a little bit for that. But otherwise, I continue to love it. It's a hilarious book. Nanny is absolutely most improved player of 2021. Everything happening with Amenth resurrected Nanny is perfection. Every line, die slow, like welcome to the slaughterhouse. Nanny getting uber violent and just wanting to take down the Locust Vial is hilarious. Her murderous rage is absolutely the standout character of 2021. I genuinely don't think there's a X-Men character that I have appreciated seeing more. I guess maybe Sync is a contender for best glow up through like two very, very good Hickman written issues in X-Men. But yeah, I mean, definitely all that stuff going on there is great. Now, for those who have kind of forgotten, like what is the deal here in Hellions with Tarn the Uncaring's return and the Locust Vial during Ten of Swords, the event. Mister Sinister sent his clone. He sent a clone of himself and the Hellions to Amenth, which is the dimension where Arakko was previously. Now it's on Mars. Keep up. And long story short, the Sinister clone was captured by Tarn the Uncaring, who's an Amenth native who sits on the Great Ring of Arakko. Okay, their leadership now on Mars, and half the Hellions were killed in Amenth, right? So that's why Wild Child and Nanny have come back with these, kind of even more hyper focused rage and violence. Again, we learned here, like specifically, they have evolved now to be able to defeat the Locust Vial and Tarn because they killed them the last time they fought. Okay, so Sinister in all of that, when the Hellions who survived got back to Krakoa, the real Mister Sinister got the DNA that they captured, which was from Tarn and his Locust Vial. He got that DNA from these Amanthian mutants, and then he killed the Hellions. Okay, so they wouldn't remember. Like this whole thing, right? So everyone, like that's a secret the Sinister has been sitting on, is that he got this DNA, he sent them there to die, he killed them himself, kind of thing. Okay, and then he lied about it, which is not surprising. He's Mister Sinister. We find out here a number of things, but we do see a cool opening sequence. It's our first actual on-panel sequence of the Great Ring of Arakko, right? So we see the mutants who run Arakko sitting with Storm, the new regent of Mars, and now a member of this group, and they are all basically telling Tarn, please don't attack Krakoa. Okay, they're making sure he doesn't lash out for losing his DNA. It's cool here to see Storm already as Regent of Mars and as a crucial player in Arakko. already having allies, right? Already having some of these Arakko mutants on her side. Seems like no one is on Tarn's side, which fair enough. He's kind of the Mister Sinister of this group. We do also have Idol, the prophet here, who is clearly calling out without saying a word. I believe she can't. Tarn references here like stealing her, like basically ripping out her voice is what it sounds like. But the prophet here is clearly like Tarn's going to violate this and go attack Krakoa to get his DNA back. It is interesting to consider too, like, I think so much about Arakko is interesting right now, but Idol in particular, we have a prophet, we have a precog, apparently, in Arakko. How does that fit into Moira's plans? Is that relevant at all? What do the Arakko mutants know through Idol that, the rest of Krakoa doesn't know? I definitely want to learn more about what's going on with the Great Ring there. Another good argument for a solo Storm series where we actually get life in Arakko as Storm sees it. So, okay, that's a cool intro, but otherwise, Tarn here, he shows up with the Locust Vial, they come back to get their DNA, and Tarn is tremendously powerful, okay? He makes the Hellions aware of Mister Sinister's betrayal, and then Sinister releases all of his Happy Birthday clones, okay? Unsurprising, this is Mister Sinister's deal, everything is Sinister. He releases a boatload of Mister Sinister clones to create chaos and to generate his escape, okay? Tarn calls it sacrilege. At first I was like, oh, I guess he's not into cloning. And then it becomes beautiful sacrilege. Yes, he is. Okay, Tarn and Mister Sinister are very much of a piece. Probably two characters that after this initial confrontation, I think in classic comic book style, we're going to see working together. And probably, my guess, is we're going to see them working together on Chimeras, okay? And because that's what we get here. We get our first official tease of a Chimera in action. Kind of, in a way. We'll talk about it, right? Mister Sinister here, he's talking to his clone. His clone is like, I'm not going to let you get away. And Mister Sinister, to get him to come with him, says, hey, come check out this Chimera I made, okay? This is interesting, right? This is what I'm talking about when I talk about Hellions connecting to seeds and connecting to ideas from House and Powers of 10. It's one of the challenging things about this era is you can't just move everything ahead a million paces at a time, but you can connect to some of these ideas and things that got us invested in the first place, that got us so excited about this era of X-Men in the first place, and that's what Hellions does. The Krakoan for the next issue reads Bitter Betrayal, which if you remember from Powers of 10, betrayal is what Mister Sinister is known for, right, in the Moira Lifelines. So let's look at this. What does it mean? What do we know about chimeras and the potential? It's been a while, right? Like we've been talking about this for a while. I think just broadly, for those of you who are like, literally, what is that word? It means combining mutant DNA. It means combining 2 to 5 sets of different mutants' DNAs and creating a chimera, an individual, a person, a mutant, who has the 5 abilities at once, okay? So the famous example here that we'll talk about is like Rasputin in Powers of 10. This new mutant who's introduced has 5 basically mutant DNAs that go into creating this one person. You have like Laura Kinney's, you have Unis the Untouchables, and then I'll show you the others. There's other ones in there, okay? But it's a combo thing, right? So that's why you have Scott and Nightcrawler in Hickman's X-Men number 7. When they're talking about like, hey, Resurrection's going to be tricky, we're going to have problems, you have them talking about like, yeah, what if a mutant wants to come back with Magneto's powers in addition to their own, right? That would be an example of a chimera if you have that capability, essentially. Now, in Powers of 10, we learned about the creation of chimeras, okay? And we learned about it through the Sinister line. There's this history in Moira's Ninth Lifeline where his chimera program is initiated, and it creates 4 badges essentially, and things eventually go wrong. There's a lot of suspicion here that has never been confirmed and never been followed up on in great detail that Mister Sinister ultimately sabotaged the whole thing by the final wave. But for a while it was working, right? There were chimeras created, there were all these combos. You have Rasputin, you have Cardinal, and again, if you read Powers of 10, you remember some of this. One thing I haven't seen talked about a lot. So in Life 9, Sinister's chimera program is kicked online when population levels of mutants reaches a crisis point. It's an emergency protocol, right? If and only if things are looking a certain level of bad, we'll bring in Mister Sinister to create chimeras. Yet here we are in Life 10, where the same crisis level of evasion, relocation, confrontation, this is mutants trying to escape the man-machine engine of war, right? That hasn't happened yet, right? It hasn't happened in the same way. So why is Mister Sinister's Life 10 chimera pace so much faster? than it was in Life 9? I think that's a really interesting question that has not been tackled in great detail. And the reason we know it's faster is not only here in Hellions number 14, Mr. Sinister telling his clone that he has a Chimera, which, like, while we know Sinister is and will create chimeras, consider too that he could be lying to get his clone to follow him, right? This could be a red herring. We could be getting all excited about, oh man, chimeras are coming, and then it's like, no, Sinister just tricked his clone because that's what he does. He lies. But we do know a chimera has been created already because Moira, in her journals back in Powers of 10, tells us that, hey, Charlie and Mags went to see Mr. Sinister. I really wish they hadn't. And she says, like, but based on what they said, he's already created his first chimera. It's himself, right? And we learned from Sinister Secrets in that same era, in Powers of 10, that Mr. Sinister injected himself, however you want to say it, I'm not a scientist, with John Proudstar DNA, okay? The original Thunderbird, the mutant who died on the X-Men's first mission in Uncanny X-Men number 94 to 95, or the all-new, all different Uncanny X-Men's, written by Chris Claremont, art by Dave Cockrum, okay? So we got Proudstar and Sinister combo, Chimera DNA, that's already running around. Apparently, that's how Mr. Sinister is a mutant, it would seem. So he is the original Chimera. He did that early if he's got John Proudstar's DNA, because again, John Proudstar dies early in the X-Men's history. So how and why did Sinister start chimeras so much earlier in Life 10 than he did in Life 9, when it didn't happen until deep into kind of this crisis point in the Man-Machine versus Mutant War? I mean, one theory is decimation is unique to Life 10. That there was a crisis point in mutant numbers, it was decimation, and that decimation being when Wanda Maximoff says no more mutants in House of M and gets rid of, basically all the population except for the 198. The problem there with that being true, which is still one of my biggest questions, is House of M and decimation unique to Life 10, or does that happen in previous Moira Lifelines? If so, why did you let it happen? But why do good things happen to bad people, Moira? Tell me. But the problem there is Thunderbird's DNA was gone before then, presumably, right? So if he's using John Proudstar's DNA, then he has to have gotten it basically earlier or around the time the all different X-Men are being put together, which is when the first team during the Claremont run is put together. So that's like early in X-Men history, So that I don't know that it works. There are certain elements, of another theory here. Could certain elements of the formation of the X-Men play out differently in Life 10 than they had before Moira loops Professor X in on the problems early, okay? Moira in Life 10 tells Professor X, hey, here's what I know. Look into my head. These are all my lifelines. And that radicalizes him over time, right? We learn about that, right? That teaches him, like, oh, mutants always lose. We need to do something different. Otherwise, we're going to lose again, right? Like, it's as simple as that, I think, in a lot of ways. Is that unique enough that Professor X's formation of the X-Men and interactions with mutant kind, and we know Mister Sinister has interactions with Professor X prior to the creation of the X-Men, right? If you read X-Men Legacy, the Mike Carey run, Mister Sinister has like an emergency hatch like in Professor X's mind in many ways, right? So like there's a certain level of tampering and manipulation and sort of connection that all these characters have. And basically, I don't know exactly how it would play out, but basically it would mean if the formation of the X-Men in Life 10, as we know it, is unique to any lifeline that Moira has gone through. I don't know exactly what those differences would be, but basically, if it's the first lifeline where Professor X knew what he knew when he did, then maybe that pushed Sinister to get John Proudstar's DNA so early, to experiment, something there, right? I don't know exactly what it is, but like that needs to be explained, I think, is why is this moving so much faster with Sinister other than just like, oh, it's a different lifeline. Because one of the rules, as I understand it, from, what's the book all this is based on? The first 14 Lives of Harry August, okay? I think, something like that. It's a really good book, and I'm blanking now if I'm getting that right in the author's name. But that book, there was kind of a debate when House and Powers came out about, did Jonathan Hickman steal that plot, essentially? And it's very similar to Moira's Lifeline. It's this character who relives lives. But one of the rules that is set up in that novel, which again is very good, and if I said the name even closer right, please Google it and check it out, is that, like, the events in the world occur the same way they would have each lifeline. Okay, you can only change so much essentially as an individual. So I don't buy the idea that like Life 9 Sinister and Life 10 Sinister are like super different. They'd still be the same people. They'd still be reacting to the same sort of environments. So again, I want to know, why is it moving so much faster? I think if it's moving faster, it has to be as a result of Moira, Professor X's, or Magneto's actions. It just makes the most sense to me. Claire North, thank you. Written by Claire North. Thank you there in the comments. Jesse. All right. So another interesting question is whether Mr. Sinister would have had DNA from Arakko in previous lifelines. Okay. In the Rasputin sample that we see back in Powers 10, Rasputin here being this character who is still hanging out behind our black hole with our good pal Zorn from Powers 10, Life 9. Rasputin's DNA, all of that is coming from mutants we know on Earth 616, right? We didn't see any names there that were like unidentifiable. So we don't know as of yet really what the involvements or what the interactions were in Life 9 in Moira's previous lifelines with mutants from Arakko, mutants from Amenth. Okay, some slight distinction there. While we know, again, that Mr. Sinister is going to create chimeras, we don't know why he's like how different the chimeras in Life 10 will be compared to what they were in Life 9. Again, very different circumstances. So when Mr. Sinister drops a chimera, when he reveals his first one, and maybe that will come in Hellions number 15, I hope it does, what will it be? The options as I see them, we could have a Proud Star, right? A Proud Star Chimera, given he's already created a Proud Star Chimera with himself. That would make a lot of sense. It would also make a lot of sense to potentially bring back Thunderbird in that way. Like, this is John Proudstar as a character who seemingly has not been resurrected, I don't think. He's being referenced as the namesake for the X-Men's Blackbird now, right? The team is using the Proudstar, or no, the Thunderbird rather than the Blackbird now, like in homage. But again, it's like, well, why aren't you resurrecting this character? That's still all very fuzzy to me. Mr. Sinister, if you resurrected an individual who's like John Proudstar with Amanthian DNA, like with Tarn the Uncaring's powers, that would be a very Mr. Sinister move. We could also just have it where it's like someone from the Locus Vial, we get some of their DNA, we mix it in with some of his Hellions, which would make a lot, or the Hellions, there I go again, combining, because he's like Mr. Sinister is working with and tampering with the Hellions all the time. Why not combine some Locus Vial and Hellions DNA and see what happens, right? That seems like a Sinister move. Also consider like a kind of gross Sinister move would be to take Psylocke's kid, from Fallen Angels, shouts to Fallen Angels, and somehow have taken that as an embryo and created that now, combined it with Arakko and Amenth DNA, and now created a first Chimera that will drive Kanan to just murder him where he stands. Right? Very possible. The best option for me, and probably the least likely, I think, because it's a little too big for probably the scope of Hellions. It's probably, this is some Infernal level idea right here, I think, is an Omega level hybrid, right? An Omega level Chimera, rather. We have not seen Sinister, like, appropriately tampering with Omega level DNA. I think it was in Marvel Incoming #1, which was, was that at the end of 2019? We see Mr. Sinister talking about all the Omega levels, and he's like, I got this DNA, I need Franklin Richards, blah, blah, blah. We haven't seen him actually doing stuff with that yet. If his Chimera is, the Omega level combination of Storm and Vulcan, or whatever it's going to be, there's only so many options here. That would be extremely exciting. That would be really, really fun. And it would also be the biggest development in terms of mutants and Krakoa protecting Omega level mutants as their number one resource, because now they could create them. That would be a huge deal. Okay, so I would love to see that. I'm curious what people think here. Like, what kind of Chimera do you think Sinister is going to reveal? Do you think he's going to reveal a Chimera at all? Because, again, I say this every time, lying liar who lies. All right, we got a question here from AJ who asks, What happened to Sinister's powers? He hasn't shown anything besides maybe super intellect. The Sinister of old would have put up a fight against Tarn. I thought the same thing. Because Tarn here shows up and he's just like whooping everyone, right? He's got some sort of psychic command. He's making the entire Hellions team. He's completely got him under his control. And I thought we haven't seen Mister Sinister use his formidable powers, because what Tarn's doing here. The reason the Locust Vial is so in awe of him, right, as this religious cult-like leader, is because he has the power to back it up. Tarn can whoop them up, right, and is threatening and is scary as a result. Mister Sinister, throughout his history, when you look at how he handles the Marauders, back in the Build to Inferno, when you look at how he handles the Nasty Boys in like 90s X Factor, Mister Sinister whoops them down. They cannot threaten him physically. They cannot threaten him in a fight because his power set is so strong. I have no idea why he's not displaying any of that. I'm kind of enjoying this version of Sinister that is just like, he just talks his way out of everything. That he is just so chatty and so annoying and so confident and then just so like backstabby that he gets out of everything. I'm liking the Machiavellian just scheme your way out of everything Sinister without using his power set. I think it makes for better stories. But in terms of like basically why we've seen none of that, that's a really good question. I don't know. It could have something to do potentially with the Chimera combination. Like, could Sinister's powers have been lessened in some way because he tampered with his genetics? Did they develop in different ways because of now this mutant DNA that he has, that he injected himself with? I don't know. I definitely don't know. I think it's a really interesting question, though, and something that could intriguingly be followed up on if the writers are so inclined. But again, it could just come down to Zeb Wells sort of recognizing that like the most enjoyable way to tell stories about Mr. Sinister right now is not to have him beat people up, but it's to have him mock them and somehow get away with it. And I think he's proven very good at that. Speaking of Zeb Wells and how good Hellions has been, I would be pretty skeptical of Spider-Man Beyond, this rebooted Amazing Spider-Man launch, if not for the presence of Zeb Wells. Like, I just think he has really elevated to a truly, truly fantastic and fun Marvel Comics writer, and I'm really curious what he's going to do with Kelly Thompson, with Saladin Ahmed in Spider-Man. It's the most excited I've been for Spider-Man comics, for at least 3 years. And actually, if I'm thinking about it, since Superior Spider-Man. So I definitely want to see what Zeb Wells can do there. Hopefully he doesn't get too distracted with the Spidey ongoings and forget us old X fans over here. All right, we got a question here from the Super Chat. It asks, when do you think the Great Ring goes into the crooked market to get Red Root back? With Planet Arakko, it feels like she'd be more needed than ever. Yeah, I think you're right. I talked about this not too long ago. Let's see. Okay, so for those who don't remember, at the end of Ten of Swords, Red Root, who is one of the Arakko or Araki, soldiers, whatever you want to call them, she's captured by the Crooked Market, led by Jim Jaspers. In Otherworld, they trapped her. Red Root was the one who could communicate with Arakko, the tree-like counterpart to Krakoa. Okay, the Great Ring, probably not going to let that stand. I would imagine Arakko itself, the actual living mutant island, wants Red Root back. Maybe not, though. Maybe they had a terrible relationship. I don't totally know. I would like to see that. It doesn't feel like the sort of thing that has a big place in Inferno. Like a lot of Otherworld seeds being followed up on, a lot of Ten of Swords seeds being followed up on, kind of doesn't feel like an Inferno story, at least as I understand it currently. Obviously, we might find out totally differently. Inferno feels so Krakoa specific in so many ways, and so specific to the fracturing of the Krakoan leadership and the Council and Mystique and Professor X and Magneto. That would seem like a tricky thing to weave in. So it makes me believe it won't happen until later. Again, though, like, I think this question, raises an interesting point, which is like, when and where does the Great Ring fit in these comics? Because right now, it's kind of just when and wherever people want to play with it. Al Ewing has sword stories. He's telling space stuff, so he gets it for a minute. Here in Hellions, we get a Great Ring sequence because Zeb Wells has some plans for it. Is it just going to bounce? Is Arakko just going to bounce between titles whenever it serves the stories, or will it actually get kind of a home? Will it actually get kind of a focus? And I would prefer the latter, I have to say. Like, if Inferno is not going to blow it all up, if we're not hitting the Moira Life 11 reset button yet, and I don't expect that we will just yet. I think we'll get close, but I don't think we will. And we're actually going to live in the Reign of X for a minute with Planet Arakko, with a mutant Mars. If we're actually going to live in that Reign of X and tell stories in that era, it would feel like a massive mistake to me if Arakko and all the characters there are only going to show up in like cameos, right? If they just become like, again, just like cameo characters who show up in the background of all the other books. I don't know the exact way to do it. Again, I've said multiple times, like, I would love to see new X-Men written by Jonathan Hickman focusing on Arakko mutants. I would love to see a Storm solo series written by Vita Ayala, bringing the Arakko mutants that way, right? Something that gives you an opportunity to really dig into all of these new mutants and all these new power sets, all these new Omega level mutants, right? I want to see Arakko culture. I want to see these characters. I want to see this fleshed out. It is the newest and most interesting development in the line right now that is like totally untapped. Totally untapped. So I think it's a really good question. I mean, again, I think like it is absolutely the book Jonathan Hickman has been working his whole life to write, because it's a Dune book. like it's literally named after Dune World, Spice Planet, Arakko. Like, that's a Dune thing. Just, you could write that book on Mars. I'd love to see it. Will we? We'll find out in due time post Inferno, but I hope so. I really do. I think that'd be awesome. All right, so let's see if there's any other good questions. I think otherwise I've got some. Let's see. I think I've tackled pretty much everything major that I wanted to talk about. But again, solid day of comics. I'm loving Hellions still. I'm loving just about every issue. X-Men, I'm coming around. I'm coming around, guys. I'm not there yet. I definitely need to see some bigger ideas. I need to see some bigger ideas and not just familiar Superteam comics tropes, because I gotta admit, I've read too many. I've read too many to not be bored by just big Superteam battles where 7 X-Men beat an annihilation wave over the course of a comic. That's not enough for me right now to get super excited, to be super intrigued, and consider that one of the better books. If it didn't look as good as it was, I don't know how involved I would be. So let's see, what other questions we got here coming in. Do you think that Hickman will redo Days of Future Past? No. I mean, that's kind of what Powers of 10 is. In a lot of ways, Powers of 10 is doing a Days of Future Past. It's doing a future version. It's just extending that concept. Like, it's just evolving the concept like thousands and thousands of years. So no, I don't expect a redone Days of Future Past. I do think it'd be cool to get a redone Age of Apocalypse. Now, is it going to literally be called that? No. But like something that was Age of Apocalypse or Secret Wars-esque, where we actually had the whole line go into, a Moira Lifeline, or we all go to Amenth, or whatever it is, where like every book gets rebooted, something drastic changes, we're all in this new world now, and somebody's trying to get us back. That would be awesome. That would be exciting. I would like it if it was like, we go to Moira Life 11, everything's new, all the characters are different, it's this whole world where every book gets rebooted, and then like somebody within that, maybe it's Moira, maybe it's Destiny, maybe it's Mystique, whoever, is like trying to get back. They're trying to get back to a lifeline where like mutant can actually survive again or something. I think that'd be cool, but no, I don't think Days of Future Past will be redone. Question here for Jesse: how do you feel about Wild Child devolving? I really liked the thing Wild Child and Nanny had going on. That was a lot of fun. Seeing those characters with their Amenthian, hyper keen and hyper aware senses. It's kind of a bummer. I liked that version of Wild Child more. I liked him being more confident. Seeing him basically beaten back to the sad puppy by Tarn the Uncaring is a genuine bummer. Because it's like, it feels like character regression, although that's not the intent. But it's. I'm curious what the what the purpose of it is. Like what is the intent behind reducing Wild Child to this sort of sad whimpering puppy again, as opposed to this increasingly interesting, confident character? Why do that? That's the question. So if that has an interesting answer, then I think we'll be okay. I mean, if it's just to have him as set dressing again, then yeah, that's going to be a bummer. We got a question here from Janela. Apologies if I mispronounced that. How do you think the Chimeras would fit in with the no clones on Krakoa stance? That's an interesting one. So, I mean, so it's not that there are no clones allowed. It's that clones will almost certainly not be resurrected, right? Like Gabby, aka Scout, Laura Kinney's clone, she's on Krakoa, right? She's allowed. The Stepford Cuckoos, are clones after a fashion. They're allowed, right? It's just like there's these questions around resurrection. And then, like, we don't know, like, if Madeline Pryor or Strife would have been allowed on Krakoa because they died or were killed before they posed a threat and they tried to invade Krakoa. So far, the clones that we see of major Marvel characters, Strife and Madeline Pryor, have threatened to invade and then were killed. So that suggests that not resurrecting them is actually a fairly acceptable stance. Although obviously in the case of like Gabby, that would probably not be the case. I think with Chimeras, probably would see a similar thing. Probably we would see where they are not resurrected, would be my guess. And I don't know, like if Sinister like really kicks off the program in earnest, they would need somewhere to live. Like all of a sudden you need to terraform another planet. I don't know, maybe Mars is big enough. Haven't traveled there myself. Couldn't say for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because like the other question with the Chimeras, that I haven't talked about so far is like, does anyone know Mister Sinister is making the Chimeras? Again, like what is the knowledge level of what Sinister is doing? Because he's been making black market clones, he's been doing things on the sly, and like I've kind of been assuming that like your Quiet Council, your Professor X and Magneto, like they kind of know what they got into bed with Sinister, and some of that they're like, listen, if it's not an immediate threat, let him do his thing, and kind of turn a blind eye. Professor X turned a blind eye to billion things that Beast is doing, right? So with Sinister, I kind of figure it's the same thing. But if he's straight up making Chimeras, that's a thing where they would have to be like talk to Myra, and then she would be like, yeah, those are good soldiers. Like we should do something with those, and then you have to figure out where to put them and what to actually do with them. Because like if he's just creating them, again, I think the question would immediately be like, well, why? And I think the answer should be to create Omega level natural resources, because that's the most important thing for mutant. If you're creating Omega level Chimeras, I guess it depends how easy it is to create them. If you would consider resurrection or not, because if you can just make them, then maybe you don't need to resurrect. And that would raise some interesting questions in the Krakoa era too, because every mutant has the benefit of knowing resurrection is possible. Whereas now, if you have interesting Chimera characters, if you had a Rasputin come into the scene, them not having resurrection would create an interesting dichotomy. It would create sort of a class structure within mutant kind that would be, pretty unique. It would be different sorts of stories and different sort of things could be told. All right, last question I'm seeing here. If you were Bulls GM, what's your ideal roster? That's right, we're talking Chicago Bulls. Amazing week for Chicago Bulls. I gotta say, I'm excited. I've joked a lot that this like crazy hype for Lonzo Ball is something I don't totally understand. But now that we got Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan, I'm locking the Bulls in for Eastern Conference crown. Sorry, Bucks, you had your run. Hope you enjoyed it. It's over. Here come the Bulls. I think it's going to be super fun. I don't know if we have the cap space or the assets to land anyone else truly amazing. I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about trading Lauri Markkanen, and I just don't know exactly what we could get for that. So I really like where we're at, honestly. I think if we can move Markkanen for like, ironically, like a Thad Young type, tough defender, like strong guy, good rebounder, defender in the post. I think that'd be okay. But as it stands, like I love this team. We're gonna score 1 billion points, and it's gonna be super fun to watch. And it's the most excited I've been about Chicago Bulls basketball since Derrick Rose's ACL. Maybe I think we had a few years after that, but it's been a minute. So that'll be super exciting. Great question, Matthew. All right. Any other final good questions? Let's see. Maybe Scarlet Witch isn't really dead. Um, hmm. Yeah, I think she is. It would be, hmm. Like, that's a thing Mystique could fake. You know? She could pull that off. The trick would then be, where is Scarlet Witch? And holding her prisoner does not seem super easy. Um, that would be interesting. That would be an interesting twist. That are actually, the Scarlet Witch did not die. That Mystique posed as her body or created a husk. How about that, right? You could do that with Wanda, maybe. Created a husk, made everyone believe she was dead. Somehow tricked or trapped Wanda so that she can't just show up and be like, guys, I'm fine. You know, I'm not dead yet. Can't do that. That would be kind of a fun twist. I'm kind of into it. And actually, it would fight off some of the fan concerns about, just kind of willy-nilly killing off a character like a Wanda. As well as some of the, right now Marvel's in the situation where they're like killing all of their interesting mystics, like Wanda's dead. There's a Death of Doctor Strange event coming. They're clearly going to bring them back. Both those characters are going to be in one of the biggest movies of 2022, right? So since Wanda's clearly going to come back, I actually kind of prefer if she wasn't dead to begin with. Like, it's kind of a better story because then you don't have to do the obvious resurrection thing. Although in Wanda's case, the resurrection thing is really complicated and interesting because can she get resurrected as a mutant, or will she be resurrected as a human? So maybe you do need that. But interesting question, I think. All right, thanks everybody for listening. This has been Casual Krakoa. I will be back every Wednesday I am able to talk about the week's X-Men comics and to answer all of your wonderful, wonderful questions. Thanks to everybody who was able to join live here. I really, really appreciate it. And, I'm Dave. You can find my stuff at comicbookherald.com. Subscribe and like the YouTube channel here for more videos like this. And, of course, you can find me on social at Comic Book Herald anytime you want to talk comics. So thanks, everybody, for listening. And, as always, enjoy the comics.